Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Lea Carroll about Across the Street and Around the Corner. Welcome, Lea.
Hi, Dan. Good to be here.
It's good to see you again. Lea and I met one night at dinner, as I don't believe in coincidences. I just don't. We sat and talked, she and her husband Bill and I, for the longest time. And just through conversation, I discovered she was an author. And I, of course, went home and ordered her book and was so happy I did. So before we talk about Across the Street and Around the Corner, will you tell me about the first two books you wrote?
Sure. So, Dan, my first book came out when I was 65 years old. And that was this one, Saint Everywhere, Travels in Search of the Lady Saints, which became a People Pick magazine selection and won the Southern California Independent Booksellers Award. And I say it's my world travels. 6 cities, seeking out 6 women across 6 centuries, and I tried to make it funny and very relevant for today. And that was so well received that the publisher said, "When can the next one come out?" And she didn't know that that was my first book. That was all my material. I was so gobsmacked that this had happened that I didn't know what to say. I said, because all my material was used up from many years of travel journals. So then she followed it up before I could answer with, "And can it be out by Christmas?" And so she also didn't realize that one took 17 years. However, how often do you get things on a silver platter? And so the worst that could happen is you can't actually get it done. But the second worst thing is to say no. So I just said yes. And to be fair, she was referring to the following Christmas. And then this one came out to quite a lot of success. And I was just getting ready to embark on a third set of travels and journeys. And just actually, I'm at a point in my life when I have a lot of personal freedom. You know, my husband and I were retired, our kids are grown, we have grandchildren. And I was just getting ready for a whole new set of travels. And each book, I broadened it, not just for what, the Catholic Church might call saints, but for people who are doing wonderful things in quiet ways around the world. But the pandemic struck and no one could go anywhere. I was about the worst lockdown person you could encounter. I was so frustrated. And the only way I cleaned my closet is to pretend I was traveling on a trip and that I was putting it in a suitcase and not the Goodwill bag. And then I thought, well, shoot, if I can't travel the world, I'm going to travel my neighborhood. And I am going to explore it as if my eyes were brand new to the place I'd lived already 40 years.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
The subtitle of this book is called A Road Home. And it reminded me of the author Thomas Wolfe, who wrote 2 books with such dissimilar titles, Look Homeward, Angel, and You Can't Go Home Again. And you proved that you definitely can go home again, because this is a loving homage to the neighborhood, as you say, you'd lived in 45 years. So give the audience a little overview of what this book is about. I mean, obviously it's about pandemic, but what were the things that spoke to you personally that made you want to write this down?
Well, so, even though I say I'm a world traveler, I've never lived further than a mile from where I was born. And so my current neighborhood of 40 years is only a mile from my childhood neighborhood. And in my exploration of like spending the time to stroll around my neighborhood and talk to people as best as I could through a mask, or invite people over to have a glass of wine on the front lawn and reconnect with people I'd been living with. But you know how time goes in your life. You go through different stages, you go through different eras of being in connection with people. And in through reconnecting with people, some I hadn't talked to in 10 years, even though they lived a block away, I really started to just ponder my own childhood and reflect on geez, it I had a great childhood. And like there's a line in the book, a happy childhood is an inoculation against the hardships of life. And
Absolutely.
the conversations with my present neighbors started to warp up in my mind in time, in terms of time, and I just started to remember all the people that influenced me as a child and the kind of shenanigans and freeform fun and the kids I grew up with and what that all was. And I started to weave it all together into sort of a handbook on how to be a neighbor.
Mm.
And so it's another one of my books that's very hard to categorize. Like, what is it? What is it? It's not a mystery. It's not a young adult. It's not this. But but it is for everybody, you know.
I totally agree. I think in a lot of ways, you might even call it an autobiography, even though I would say it's not a typical autobiography.
Yeah.
But, I do think that the quote you quoted about a happy childhood or a good childhood, it stands to reason that a lot of us have had a fairly happy life because of having a happy childhood. It is something that when you form good relationships as a child, whether it's with your family, your friends, you have an ability to form healthy relationships as an adult. And I
Right.
see, unfortunately, we see in this world, there are so many children who don't have that, and they have such difficulty as an adult trying to form real relationships. And I know in the book, one of the things you said, which I find hard to believe because you and I talked so easily together when we met, that you had a little bit of, you needed to come a little out of your shell to reconnect with some of your neighbors. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, because I think when you connect with people like your neighbors or people that you don't have an actual reason, it's so much of it is about purpose. Like, oh, I need to talk to that person about. But if you don't have a reason, you just want to be open. You have to be ready for the fact that they might have earbuds on and are walking on the street and you say hello, hello, hello 3 times and they don't respond.
Right. They're in their world.
They're in their world. Um, or you have to be ready for the fact that people don't like live as much in their present environment as they used to because all of our minds are preoccupied with our virtual lives, really.
Yes, yes. And
So
especially this thing that captivates so much of our day, every day, constantly, all day long. I
yeah.
love my phone, but at some days I want to hide it somewhere that I can't find it because it annoys me.
Yeah, yeah. So for that reason, and also I knew I was embarking on sort of like a little personal project. It was a personal project of trying to find satisfying ways to get through the pandemic, and so that just took a little bit of me saying, "Okay, I'm going to do this." It wasn't just like, "Oh my God, I just ran into my best friend. I can't believe how lucky I am." It's just it was a little more purposeful.
Yes, and I like that. That's one of the things that in reading this that I really came to love so very much was it was purposeful. And of the history of growing up in your neighborhood that you talk about it with such love and respect. I mean, most of us have lived many different places. I know you lived in San Francisco when you were in college,
Yeah.
but you came back to the place that you grew up. Most of us seem to go far away. So I think returning to a place that you obviously loved then and love now, and it's you weave in all these stories from your childhood that are just so beautiful. And I will tell you that I was reading it on the plane coming back from New Orleans, and I laughed out loud because in the scene where you're selling the guppies, And there's a jogger, and you said it was the first time you ever saw a jogger because people didn't exercise in public. I laughed right out loud because I remember the first time I saw a jogger was in college. No one ran in my neighborhood in the little village I grew up in unless there was something chasing you. It just simply didn't happen. But you weave this story in, and it just, it's one more place from your childhood on a little street that you now live very close to where you grew up. So it's just another loving homage to your neighborhood.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And do you have a favorite story in the book, or is there maybe a story that didn't make it in the book?
Well, the readers, and actually she lives very large in my mind, seem to have fallen in love with Mrs. McKay.
Yes,
And
me too.
did you? Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Between Ruthie and Mrs. McCabe, I was totally there.
Yeah. So Ruthie was my grandmother that lived with us forever, and she was the old retired silent movie star. And as I say in the book, um, uh, you know, even though it was her career was spanned from like say 1913 to 1919. And before Hollywood, she worked for Thomas Edison actually, and he invented
Wow.
the movie camera. But even though it was 1960, in her mind, it could have been yesterday. And she, you know, so she was a character, and she lived with us, and she had one daughter. That was my mother. And my mom went on to have 9 kids. And every time my mother would get pregnant, my grandmother would go into a complete tizzy and say, "You're ruining your life with all these kids." And so my mom just learned to not tell her. And and
Surprise.
yeah,
Here's number 8.
exactly. She left a wonderful legacy of a truly unique character, but she was very self-absorbed and very much like she didn't have a good day unless she'd had a good fight with someone.
Mm.
And she had plenty of opportunity because she was an advertising sales lady. So she knew every merchant up and down the street, and she would come home with her tales of selling ads to the anyway. We're digressing right now,
No,
Dan.
no, but I love it. I love it because I think that is exactly what the our audience wants to hear, because these are stories that you share, and you share with such love. I mean, there were so many very colorful characters in your childhood.
Yes,
Mrs. McKay, I loved her because, and I suspect for the same reason everybody else did, is because she was larger than life, but yet she managed to get all of you children to work for free, basically. And I mean, that in and of itself is an enormous talent, because children are wonderfully pliable, but they can also be extraordinarily stubborn. So to get a child to like someone who's different already, but to get a child to work for someone who's different and be thankful that they had the opportunity, that's a talent that she had for sure.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so I think she's kind of like a bit of a standout favorite from my childhood, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. We had, because I grew up in such a very small place. I mean, Altadena has more people than the little village I grew up in. I mean, there were only around 400, maybe 450 of us. And so you knew everyone. So just as you went down the street and around the corner, I did the same thing growing up. So I felt like we had a very similar childhood in the fact that you do know everyone, and that connection is so important. And I think for me, when the pandemic struck, I am a hugger by nature. With friends, sometimes with coworkers, family. I mean, my family is very touch oriented, and that was probably the most difficult thing for me during the pandemic. I mean, I had people that I knew who died, and I knew people were petrified that they were going to catch something that might kill them. And it did kill a lot of people. But at the same time, my innate need to touch other people didn't just disappear because the pandemic came along. And
Right.
it became probably the hardest thing for me because I just simply couldn't hug friends and loved ones
Right.
anymore because we had to be careful. And I obviously didn't want to give someone something that would have been something I could never have overcome in life. But yet at the same time, we found ways, you and I and several other people, we found ways to make connections.
Right.
A dear friend of mine, Dorothy, sent me a text one day and said, Dan, every day I text 3 gratitudes with some friends, and I'm curious if you would like to be included. And I said, yes, I think I would. And for the last 5 years, we've texted 3 gratitudes with each other. Now, I do that with some other people, but I don't do it on a group text. And I don't do it on a group text because that means everyone else is responsible. And we simply wanted it to be a connection between she and I. And it was a godsend. It was something small, but it was a godsend because I needed that. I needed that connection with other people.
I love it when you said it was something small, but it was like a godsend, because that's what I kind of like with one of the things one of the points of this book, which I hope it's not so obvious, but it's like the power of the small act. Like, it doesn't take very much to help your neighborhood become a cherished place to live. It it really just requires your desire to have it so, and then when the opportunities arise, be the person who can smile, or who can be there present on the sidewalk, or lend a tiny hand in some way, and it has wonderful and powerful consequences.
Well, and I think that when I know quite a few people who make what I would call saint trips, as your first 2 books do, or they visit a cathedral when they go to Paris. They want to see all of the large cathedrals. Part of that is because they're looking for a connection with other people who are like minded, but they're also looking for a connection to God, the universe, whatever you call that part of your life. And for some of us, that's very important. Not everyone believes the same way I do. I know a lot of people who don't believe in a deity. I personally do. I have what I call a very good relationship with God and the universe. And that's what I got from your book. And there again, it's important because when you and I talked about this, there's nothing preachy about your book. This is not a book to be, oh, you must live this way. If you don't live this way, there's a problem. It's quite the opposite. It's Mary Lee sharing what went on in her life during a time where everyone was affected, because no one skated through the pandemic. No one.
Yeah. Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, so for your listeners, the last 10 feet of our yard, I'm in Pasadena, but the last 10 feet of our yard are actually Altadena. So all the fires came within 2 blocks of our house. And I just can't stop thinking about how it was simply a whim of the wind that our house, our street, my neighbors, our houses are fine. While it just really struck me that way. And so the little acts that I illustrate in this book, or make reference to, they are really being played out in a large way post fire. It snapped everybody to attention about the necessity to be of use in one way or another, you know.
And it's one of the things that came up in your book when I was reading it was there was a time during the pandemic where it surged, it
Yeah,
had ebbs and tide, and there was a point where there was a little ebb when 2 of your brothers came and you went to breakfast at Fox's, and then you
yeah,
talk about riding past the hardware store. Both of those places are gone from the Eaton fire, and those are only blocks from where you currently live. And I was struck by the profoundness of it, because we have not only an ability, but we have a responsibility to look out for our neighbors as well as we can, and to have as much communication as we can, because otherwise isolation doesn't do anything good for anyone's mind. Isolation, only maybe if you go into the woods to have a moment with nature,
Right. Yeah.
then isolation works. But as far as humanity goes,
No.
complete isolation is definitely not the way to go.
No, 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 and it's hard today because there's a lot of, messages, to the contrary. People they say that today people have, very small civic lives these days, but very large private lives, and it used to be quite the opposite,
Yes.
and, it's just something that that's just a reality that is part of the landscape, but it doesn't mean it creates happiness or anything,
No,
like that.
no. No, and I think because I'm going to brag about you and I'm married, Lee. I think those of us who try very hard to have uh, connection with other human beings have a happier life. And I wish that for everyone. I'm not saying we're better than someone else, not at all. I think everyone has the exact same ability that we have. We just enjoy doing that. And so I wish that for everyone.
Yeah. I didn't include a quote that kind of rang in my ears while I was writing this book, um, because I like to keep it of a tone that is almost playful, almost playful, but yet also, I look for opportunities to put something in to ponder for, or the reader might want to ponder or give them some higher value for their time spent in the book. But there was one quote, and it's by Dorothy Day, who is, important in the Catholic Church. She's dead now and, is on her way to sainthood. But she, said, I think it's so profound. She said, "We have all known the long loneliness, and the answer is community." And to me, that's a true thing. Yeah.
It is. So now I'm gonna end on sort of a little bit of a goofy note because you do put in a lot of light stuff. So I
Yeah.
do want to. So I did laugh also about the emergency preparedness chapter. And the reason I laughed is because I know that you went and looked at all of these things you had for emergency preparedness, and most of them were out of date, which is totally understandable. But my laugh is a friend of mine showed me his stash of emergency preparedness and his electric can opener to open the cans. And I said to him, "You have a manual can opener, right?" And he said, "No." And I'm like, "Yeah, that electric can opener is not going to do you any good if we don't have electricity." So it's the little things in life, that you have to think of the whole situation.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of time, it's so funny because Southern California, that is something that brings neighbors together is earthquake preparedness.
Sure.
But earthquake preparedness is a funny thing. It's like, how do you stay prepared for something that might happen in 10 years? It always falls apart. I
Yeah.
would assume, and so, uh, honestly, Dan, every time I look at a fire extinguisher, and this is pre-fire, I get nervous. Because how do you work this damn thing?
Well, that's right. And
I mean, you
so
try it once in a parking lot. Okay.
well, and also we know that with the fires that we had in January, one fire extinguisher is not enough. I mean, I don't want to be maudlin, but one is just simply not enough. One is only to put out a very small fire, and it's one of those things. But I do think that we have to be as prepared as possible. But I also think that knowing the neighbors, at least to say hello to, is important because there comes a time where you really may have to depend on that neighbor.
Yeah. And that's it too. The other thing I'd like to say about the books that I write is that I really suffer for I don't suffer. That's an overstatement. I have had ADD all my life. And so one of my little jokes to myself is like, wow, I really started writing when everybody stopped reading. And I thought, thanks God. But, but, but I also know that readers appreciate a book that isn't 1,000 pages long, and so these books, they give people it's entertaining, it's a thought provoking, and you can You can take it in its order, which is how I intended it, so that the rhythm, but it's not necessary. Is you know. Yeah.
That's the best kind of all, really, that you can pick up any one of the three and start it any direction and you're still going to be okay. So again, the book is Across the Street Around the Corner. It is so delicious, highly recommended. It will make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and it'll certainly make you think. Thank you, Mary Lee, for being here.
I appreciate being your guest. I appreciate you, Dan, and I look forward to more fun with you.
I absolutely agree. Hang on for me just a second. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at Go Out with Dan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.